I buried my son. And when I came home that night, my daughter-in-law told me straight at the dinner table, "This isn't your house anymore. You're just an old man living off us." The words cut deep, sharper than the cold rain outside. A lifetime of sacrifice for family, and in one breath, she tried to erase it all. But she didn't know my son had left me a promise, and the papers to prove it. Quietly, I held that secret close, waiting for the right moment, and when the will was finally read, her face turned pale, because the house she tried to take was never hers to claim. Do you want to know how I exposed her in front of everyone? Stay with me until the end, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Then comment the city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far my story travels. The church smelled faintly of lilies and polished wood. Shadows stretched across the pews, cast by the dim autumn light filtering through stained glass windows. Guests filled the room slowly, their voices hushed, their eyes red. It was my son's funeral, yet I felt more like an intruder than a father. Marla appeared at my side, her hand cool on my arm. "This way," she said in a tone too sweet to be sincere. Before I could answer, she guided me away from the aisle leading to the front. My eyes lingered on the first row where family should sit, but her grip tightened, steering me toward the back. The wooden bench creaked beneath my weight. From here, the pulpit looked distant, blurred. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat, but it stayed, heavy and unyielding. All around me, people whispered their condolences to one another, avoiding my eyes as if they had been instructed to. Marla's heels clicked back down the aisle, echoing like a verdict. Slow, quiet grief settled into my chest, not only for my son, but for the insult delivered in front of every mourner. My hands gripped the cane resting across my knees, knuckles pale. It wasn't the seat itself that hurt, it was the message. I no longer belonged. The hymn began, voices lifting together in mournful harmony. My gaze stayed fixed on the coffin, just visible past the heads of the congregation. Memories pressed in, fishing trips by the French Broad River, long talks in the yard as we repaired the old shed. The last time he told me, "Dad, no matter what, family sticks together." I blinked hard, forcing back the sting in my eyes. At the front, Marla sat tall, draped in black lace, her hand on Jody's shoulder. She owned the space that should have been mine. Guests leaned in close to comfort her, as though she were the heartbroken one, while I, tucked away in the shadows, might as well have been invisible. The bitterness in my chest sharpened, layered over sorrow. The promise my son had once spoken now seemed like an echo I was grasping at with empty hands. A couple behind me whispered, "Why isn't he up front?" one murmured. "Strange, isn't it?" I kept my eyes forward, jaw tight. The whispers spread like ripples. Marla turned slightly, caught my eye, and gave me a thin smile that didn't reach her face. It was the kind of smile that said, "See how gracious I am, letting him be here at all." My cheeks burned, though not from shame. Anger stirred in my gut, coiling tighter with each hushed voice. They saw me as a pitiful old man, pushed aside for the sake of peace. None of them knew the truth, that peace was just Marla's excuse to silence me. I shifted on the bench, every creak of the wood amplifying the humiliation. After the final prayer, people rose, filing out with solemn steps. I moved slower, cane tapping against the floor. Marla intercepted me near the exit, her hand alighting on my shoulder as though we shared some tender bond. "Oh, Lester," she said loudly enough for the guests around us to hear. "This must be so hard for you. I just want everyone to know how much I care about you." Her tone dripped with false concern. Heads turned, eyes softened with sympathy. For her, they thought she was the dutiful daughter-in-law, offering kindness to a grieving old man. If only they could hear the bite beneath her words, the quiet triumph in her eyes. Resentment flared so sharply I had to draw a slow breath to steady myself. If I spoke, I might say something I couldn't take back. And that was exactly what she wanted. So I endured, letting her hand rest like a weight I could not shake off. Outside, the air was crisp, heavy with the scent of rain about to fall. I moved toward the steps, each one measured. Behind me, voices trailed off until only Marla's whisper to Jody reached my ears. He won't be around much longer anyway. The words slid through me like a blade. My grip on the cane tightened, wood pressing against my palm. Betrayal surged, hot and unrelenting. Did she mean my age, my grief, or something more sinister? The sky darkened, and the first drops of rain speckled the ground. Isolation pressed in with the weight of the storm. Each step away from the church felt heavier, but somewhere inside, a new fire sparked, one that would not be so easily extinguished. The rain hadn't let up since the funeral. Cold droplets clung to my jacket, soaking through as I trudged up the path to my porch. The weight of the day pressed down harder than the storm itself. All I wanted was the quiet of my own home, the four walls where my son's laughter once echoed. My fingers shook as I slid the key into the lock, ready to shut out the world for the night. But the key didn't fit. I twisted it again, harder, convinced it was just the rain numbing my hands. The metal scraped uselessly. My heart sank as realization crept in. The lock had been changed. My house, no longer opened for me. I stood there in the downpour, a man left out in the cold. The porch light above flickered, mocking me with its pale glow. The door cracked open, just enough for Marla's face to appear in the gap. She didn't look surprised to see me standing there drenched, her lips pressed into that tight smile I'd come to recognize, a smile that hid the blade behind her words. "Oh, Lester," she said, voice coated with syrup. "I had the locks changed, for security." Her tone carried the weight of a warning. Behind her, Jody's small face peeked out, eyes wide, not a word leaving her lips. My granddaughter, who once ran into my arms, now just stared at me as if I were a stranger dripping rain onto her mother's floor. I swallowed hard, trying to find my breath. "Security, this is my home." Marla tilted her head, that smile never faltering. "Of course, but times have changed. We just need to be careful now. You understand, don't you?" The words sliced deeper than the cold water soaking me. Careful. That's what she called shutting me out. At last, she opened the door wider. "Come in. Don't want you catching a chill." I stepped inside, though it no longer felt like stepping into my house. The air was warm, but it didn't welcome me. I followed her into the dining room, my wet shoes squeaking against the hardwood. A stranger walking into his own life. Dinner was already on the table. Marla gestured toward the far end, a chair nearly tucked against the wall. "Why don't you sit there?" she said sweetly. I obeyed, though it twisted my gut. My plate came last, portions small, almost an afterthought. Across the table, Marla's voice filled the room, carrying every conversation. Jody giggled at her mother's words, glancing at me only once before lowering her eyes, as though looking too long might cause trouble. Each bite I took tasted like sand, my own dining table, yet I was the guest nobody wanted. I watched Marla command the room with ease, painting herself as the grieving widow who carried strength for her daughter. Not once did she acknowledge me as the man who built the very walls surrounding us. Halfway through the meal, she mentioned a name. "Clayton has been such a comfort these past few weeks," she said, her fork lingering in the air. "He's been helping me through the hardest nights." The name hung between us. She glanced my way briefly, as if daring me to question it. My chest tightened, suspicion blooming like a storm inside me. I bit back the words. Confronting her here, in front of Jody, would only give her more power. So I chewed quietly, every muscle in my jaw working harder than it should. When dinner ended, I lingered near the hall, ready to retreat to my room. That's when I heard it. Jody's whisper, sharp as glass in the silence. "Why is Grandpa even here? He doesn't live here anymore." The words cut deeper than the cold rain had. I froze. Marla didn't correct her, didn't defend me. She let the silence agree with the child's question. I gripped the handle of my cane so tight my knuckles whitened. Rage and despair swirled together inside me, heavy and suffocating. My son had promised me this house would always be mine. Now, standing in the shadows of my own hallway, I realized I was being erased, not only from these walls but from memory itself. The night deepened, shadows stretching across the room. As I lay awake, Marla's words and Jody's whisper replayed in my head like cruel echoes. One thought kept me anchored: my son's promise. "This house will always be yours, Dad." I clung to those words as if they were the last rope holding me to the world. The rain had not stopped all night. It drummed against the windows, a steady rhythm that made the silence in the house even heavier. Sleep wouldn't come, no matter how I tried. The chair in the corner of the living room creaked under my weight as I sat staring into the dim light of the lamp. Something about the space felt different, emptier. My eyes wandered to the shelves where photo albums had always been lined neatly. Now there were gaps, as though pieces of my life had been lifted away without permission. A knot formed in my stomach. I rose slowly, cane tapping softly against the floor, and searched through the living room. The albums weren't there. The small wooden box where I kept mementos from my son, letters, birthday cards, old programs from school plays, was gone too. My pulse quickened. The absence was louder than the rain outside. Near the back door, a black trash bag leaned against the wall, half open. I bent carefully, pulling it closer. Inside, I caught the glint of glass. My hand trembled as I drew out a picture frame, one that had held my son's smile on the day he graduated. The photo was smudged, the frame cracked, tossed among empty cartons and tissues as though it meant nothing. The breath caught in my chest. More frames followed, all familiar. My boy holding Jody as a baby, the fishing trip we took in Tennessee, the photo of us standing in front of this very house the day he bought it. Every memory, every reminder of him, stuffed into a bag meant for the dump. A sound escaped me, something between a sigh and a groan. It felt as though Marla had reached into my chest and thrown my heart in there with the rest. Clutching one photo, I lowered myself back into the chair. It was from a summer long ago, my son in his 20s, standing tall with his arms slung over my shoulders. I could almost hear his voice again. "Dad, this house is your home until the end. Don't ever forget that." The words replayed, soft but steady, like a vow whispered across time. My lips moved without thinking, repeating them. "This house is your home until the end." The promise wrapped around me like a thin blanket. Not enough to warm, but enough to remind me I wasn't completely alone. I pressed the photo to my chest and let the tears fall quietly, hoping no one upstairs could hear. A creak on the staircase made me stiffen. Jody drifted past the living room, her hair loose, eyes catching the light for a moment. She glanced at me, at the photo in my hand. Her voice was quiet but sharp. "Grandma said those belong in the past." She didn't wait for an answer. Her footsteps carried her away, leaving me with the sting of her words. The phrase echoed in my head, harder to bear than the rain, heavier than the silence. Belong in the past. Was that what I was to her now? Just a relic taking up space. The photo blurred in my vision, but I held it tighter. Later, when the house fell quiet again, I rose and placed the photo back on the mantel where it had always been. My hand lingered there, a vow forming deep inside. She would not erase him from this home, nor would she erase me. Just then, Marla's voice floated down from upstairs, muffled but clear enough. "We'll make it official soon." The words sliced through me. My grip on the mantel tightened. Official? What did she mean? The rain hammered harder against the glass as if urging me to stay awake. Whatever Marla was planning, I needed to be ready. The church reception hall smelled faintly of coffee and potluck casseroles, a familiar scent that usually carried comfort. That Sunday afternoon, though, it pressed down like a weight. And neighbors and church friends filled the long tables, voices mingling in cheerful tones, while I found myself tucked away in a corner chair, cane resting against my leg. From there, I could see Marla gliding through the crowd, her black dress immaculate, her smile gracious. She looked every bit the grieving widow everyone expected, the one who had borne tragedy with dignity. Not many noticed the old man sitting in the shadows, watching. The hum of chatter carried on, punctuated by polite laughter whenever Marla spoke. She seemed to gather people like moths to a flame, retelling stories of my son, her late husband, in a way that placed her at the center. I kept my gaze lowered, nodding occasionally at familiar faces who offered me a sympathetic glance but didn't linger. My chest felt tight, not from grief alone, but from the unease of knowing my place in this family was shifting before their very eyes. When the volunteers brought out trays of sandwiches and coffee, the line formed quickly. I stayed seated, waiting. My name wasn't called. No one gestured for me to come forward. By the time I reached for a plate, most of the better portions were gone. I was left with scraps at the edge of the tray, a soggy sandwich, lukewarm coffee. It stung more than hunger. It was the feeling of being forgotten. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. "Lester, good to see you." I looked up to find Darius Penn, my son's old friend, tall and broad-shouldered, his smile genuine. Warmth spread through me at the sight of him, a reminder that not everyone had abandoned me. Before I could answer, Marla appeared at his side, slipping between us with practiced ease. "Darius," she exclaimed, her hand brushing his arm. "I'm so glad you came. Poor Lester here. He's been telling the same stories over and over." "You must be tired of hearing them," she laughed lightly, her eyes cutting toward me, a subtle dagger masked in charm. The corners of Darius's smile faltered, and I felt heat rise in my chest. I wanted to defend myself, but the words caught in my throat. She had a way of making me feel small with the gentlest tone, as if her cruelty was invisible to anyone but me. The moment came sharper than I expected, in the middle of the hall, voices still chatting around us. Marla raised her voice just enough for others to hear. "Honestly," she said, shaking her head with a sigh, "he's just an old man living off the rest of us. A burden." The room fell quiet. A ripple of surprise spreading. Forks paused midair. Neighbors glanced at one another. My grip tightened on my cane until my knuckles ached. Every instinct screamed to speak, to shout, to demand she take it back. But all I did was clench my jaw and stare at the floor. Then came the worst blow. Jody's voice, light and careless, carried across the table where she sat with her friends. "Grandpa's just a burden," she repeated. The words giggled out as if they were harmless, but they sliced through me deeper than any insult Marla had thrown. Hearing it from my granddaughter, my son's child, was like a blade twisting in my chest. The hall's noise resumed slowly, people unsure whether to laugh or frown, choosing instead to look away. My heart pounded in my ears. I kept still, though inside I was unraveling. Darius caught my eye across the room, his brows knit together in concern. But before he could approach, Marla swooped in again. She slipped her arm through his, drawing him aside with a smile so smooth it seemed rehearsed. As she leaned close, I caught the words, soft but sharp. "Don't worry. He won't be around much longer." A chill ran down my spine. My fist trembled around the cane, anger bubbling under the humiliation. Whatever she meant, it was more than cruelty now. It was a warning, or a plan. The storm outside had picked up by the time I stepped through the front door. My clothes clung heavy to my shoulders, rainwater dripping onto the worn hardwood floor. The echo of laughter and whispers from the community hall still rang in my ears, every word from Marla and even Jody slicing deeper than I cared to admit. For too long, silence had been my shield. But tonight the storm outside seemed to awaken something in me, something unwilling to bow any longer. The house smelled faintly of wine and roasted chicken, though my stomach turned at the thought of eating. I set my cane by the door and leaned heavily against the wall for a moment, forcing my breath to steady. All the stares from earlier, the way Marla's voice had carried across that room, an old man living off others, it burned hot in my chest. My hands trembled, not from age, but from the anger of being stripped of dignity in front of people who had once respected me. The kitchen light glowed faintly at the end of the hallway. I followed the sound of clinking glass, finding Marla perched at the counter with a wine glass in hand, her hair perfectly set as though humiliation were just another accessory she wore with ease. She didn't look surprised when I entered. Her eyes slid over me as if I were just another nuisance she had to deal with. Back so soon? She asked, smirking over the rim of her glass. I thought you'd be out there longer, soaking up the sympathy. I stood straighter, the ache in my back nothing compared to the ache in my pride. Enough, Marla, I said, my voice even but sharp. You will not talk about me that way again. Not in front of them. Not in this house. Her smirk faltered, but only for a moment. She set the glass down, leaning forward with a mockery of calm. Oh! Finally found your voice. Lester, you should have kept it buried. People see you for what you are, an old man clinging to what doesn't belong to him anymore. Her words came faster now, venom dripping with each syllable. You think this house is yours forever? You think Jody's future doesn't matter? You're selfish. Lester, my husband, your son, would never want his daughter trapped in the shadow of an old man who refuses to let go. The storm outside crashed against the windows, thunder shaking the frame. My jaw tightened. Her cruelty was no longer hidden behind politeness. She'd torn the mask away herself. I stepped closer, meeting her eyes. This house has been mine long before you ever stepped foot in it. My son knew it. He promised me as much, and as long as I'm breathing, you will not erase me from my home or from his memory. The steadiness of my tone surprised even me. She, on the other hand, shifted in her seat, her confidence flickering. She refilled her glass too quickly, as if drowning the tremor in her hand. You don't scare me, she spat finally, her voice rising. You can pretend to be righteous all you want, but you're nothing but a bitter, stubborn old man, and if you think you can stand in the way of me giving Jody the life she deserves, you're mistaken. I'll fight you every step of the way. The air between us buzzed with tension, the storm outside only amplifying it. For the first time, I felt no urge to retreat, no temptation to swallow my pride in the name of keeping peace. She had taken enough from me, respect, comfort, even the warmth of my granddaughter's smile, but the house and my dignity would not be hers. You'll see soon enough, Marla, I said quietly but firmly. There are consequences for what you've done, for what you continue to do. Her face hardened. Consequences? Don't threaten me, Lester. You'll lose. A knock at the front door cut through the storm. Both of us froze. Marla's eyes narrowed, suspicion replacing her fury. Slowly, I turned and walked to the door, cane tapping against the floor with purpose. When I opened it, the sight of Armand Keene standing there, rain dripping from his hat, made the air in the house shift. He held a folder under his arm, his expression calm but deliberate. Evening, Lester, he said, his voice steady. I think it's time we talked. Behind me. Marla stiffened. I didn't need to turn to know the fear creeping across her face. I glanced over my shoulder, meeting her glare with calm defiance. Now, I said, opening the door wider. We'll see the truth. The storm outside rattled the old windows, its rhythm echoing the storm that had been brewing inside these walls for weeks. I sat in my armchair, the weight of the day pressing heavily on my shoulders, when the knock came. Armand stepped in with his usual calm air, though I caught the subtle flicker of concern in his eyes as he greeted me. He shook off his coat, placed his briefcase on the table, and gave me a look that steadied my spirit. He was here as both lawyer and friend. Marla, perched on the edge of the couch with a glass of wine in her hand, narrowed her eyes as soon as she spotted the folder he carried. She didn't say a word, but her posture tightened, as if she already sensed what was coming. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Armand slid the folder open with deliberate care, pulling out neatly arranged documents. Lester, he began, his voice even, these are the official copies of your son's will and the property records. I thought it best we go over them now, before anything escalates further. His words were calm, but their weight landed like thunder. My pulse quickened. I leaned forward, clutching my cane, while Marla's jaw clenched, her polished nails tapping against the rim of her wineglass. Jody sat at the staircase, quiet, her wide eyes darting between us, unsure of what was unfolding. Armand read aloud, his voice slicing through the storm outside. The property located at 214 Willow Bend Lane shall remain the possession of Lester Vaughn until his passing. Each syllable was a hammer striking the foundation of Marla's charade. Her face hardened instantly. "This is absurd," she spat, standing as though her height could give her authority. "He must have manipulated my husband in those final weeks. You think anyone will believe this old man didn't twist things for his benefit?" Her voice cracked, not with grief, but with rage. She slammed her glass onto the coffee table, the wine spilling like blood across the polished wood. "You've always wanted to ruin me, Lester. You've wanted to strip Jody and me of a future. Admit it." Her words cut sharp, but I had weathered storms fiercer than her. Anger burned in my chest, but I held it down, steadying myself. Armand didn't flinch, though his hand rested protectively on the stack of documents as though shielding the truth itself. Marla's voice rose, trembling with desperation. "If you think this piece of paper makes you untouchable, think again. I can walk into that church tomorrow and tell every single person what you've really been like. You neglected your family, Boo, didn't you? You mistreated me, ignored your granddaughter. People will believe me because I'm the grieving widow, and you're just an old man clinging to the past." She leaned close, her breath sharp with wine, her eyes burning with hatred. "I'll destroy your name before I let you take this from me." Her threat wasn't just noise, it was venom, a glimpse of just how far she was willing to go. Jody's head bowed lower at the staircase, her hands fidgeting in her lap. Even in her silence, I felt the sting of betrayal, my granddaughter hearing lies she wasn't old enough to unravel. I steadied my breath, drawing strength not from anger but from conviction. "You can spew lies, Marla, but you'll never erase the truth," I said evenly. "This house was built with my hands and secured with my son's promise. The community knows who I am, and they've seen who you are becoming." My voice did not rise, but it cut through her rage with quiet authority. For a moment, her bravado faltered. Jody looked at me then, really looked, as if searching for which version of me to believe. I held her gaze, not with pleading, but with the strength of a man who had nothing left to prove. Marla's lip curled in frustration, her power slipping from her grasp as the document sat between us like immovable stone. Without another word, she stormed out of the living room, the slam of the door shaking the house. Silence followed, broken only by the growl of thunder overhead. Armand closed the folder and placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "She won't stop here," he warned softly. "She'll look for any angle, even lies, to tear you down. We need to prepare for the will reading. This storm is only beginning." I nodded, staring out the rain-streaked window. Lightning illuminated the yard, stark and unforgiving. "Let her try," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "I've faced worse, and I'm still here." The storm raged on, but for the first time, I felt a fire inside me that would not be extinguished. The courthouse corridor smelled faintly of polish and old paper. Marble walls echoed every step, and I could feel the weight of eyes on me as I walked beside Armand. His voice was calm, steady, but I caught the way his glance shifted to the people watching us. Whispers followed in our wake, faint but sharp, like knives against the back. A lifetime in this town, and suddenly I was a stranger among my own neighbors. Armand leaned closer, his tone clipped. "Stay steady, Lester. They're trying to rattle you before we even get to the will reading." I nodded, jaw tight. The storm had ended outside, but it lingered in here, thick, heavy, impossible to ignore. Every look I caught carried suspicion, and every whisper seemed to rewrite my past. The fight was no longer confined to my living room. It had spilled into the streets. The cafe was warm, the smell of coffee beans masking the damp of the morning air. I thought I could slip in quietly, take a seat by the window, and collect myself. But even here, the storm followed. 2 neighbors, women I'd known since they were children, sat behind me, Their voices weren't hushed. He was always too controlling with his boy, one said, stirring sugar into her cup. And I heard he had a temper. Poor Marla. Imagine what she's been through, the other replied. My hand tightened around the mug until it shook. Heat rose in my chest. Not from the coffee, but from shame. From fury. From the sting of hearing my life twisted into poison. For a moment, I wanted to turn, to shout the truth into their faces. But instead, I placed the cup down gently, left a bill on the table, and walked out into the cold air. Pride held me upright, but inside I felt hollow, not far across town. Marla sat in a booth with Clayton Rourke. His rough features softened when she leaned in, whispering with urgency. You just need to say you saw it, she told him, fingers brushing his hand. Say he mistreated me, that he frightened Jody. People will believe you. Clayton hesitated, his eyes darting toward the window. It's a dangerous game, Marla. What if it blows back on us? It won't, she hissed. By the time we're done, everyone will see him as the bitter old man he is. You and I, she paused, lowering her voice, will have the future we deserve. He finally nodded, not with conviction but with resignation. Their pact was sealed in the quiet corner of that cafe, a lie born of greed and desperation. That evening, as shadows stretched across the living room, Jody appeared at my door. She stood uncertain, her face pale, hands clutching the strap of her school bag. Grandpa? She whispered, eyes downcast. Mom's planning something. I don't know what, but she keeps saying it'll be over soon. I studied her face, searching for the little girl who used to run into my arms after school. But now, she looked torn in two, her voice carrying both warning and fear. Listen to me, I said softly. Whatever she tells you, remember what's true. Remember who I am. Her eyes flickered up to mine, wet with unspoken conflict, before she turned away. The door closed behind her, leaving the room colder than before. Later, Armand arrived with a face carved in stone. He held a document in his hand, his jaw set. She's filed an emergency petition, he said. She's claiming you're unfit to manage the estate. They're moving fast. Lester. I stared at the courthouse papers, the ink bold and final. The battle line was clear now. This wasn't whispers in the pews or gossip in cafes anymore. This was war. I looked toward the courthouse in the distance, its steps gleaming wet under the streetlights. My hand tightened around the cane. Then we fight it in the open, I muttered. The storm outside had passed, but a greater one had just begun. The courthouse buzzed like a hive, the low hum of voices bouncing off the paneled walls as I stepped inside. Rows of townspeople filled the benches, their eyes darting between Marla and me, curiosity painted across every face. The air carried that heavy scent of polish and dust, the kind that clung to old buildings. Armand leaned close, his voice steady but low. Stay calm, Lester. Truth has its way of breaking through. My grip on the cane tightened, not from weakness but to anchor myself, across the aisle. Marla sat composed, her lips twisted in a smile that dared me to falter. Beside her, Jody shifted nervously, eyes downcast. The judge entered, commanding silence with nothing more than his presence. My heart thudded hard, each beat echoing the weight of the years I had carried this family. Marla didn't glance at me once. She didn't need to. Her smugness filled the room, telling me she believed the battle already won. When her turn came, Marla rose gracefully, as if she were stepping onto a stage. Your Honor, she began, her voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. My late husband's father has been a difficult presence in our home. He's unstable. She gestured to the door, and in walked Clayton Rourke. His presence jolted me. I knew his face only faintly, but the way he took the stand with ease, it was clear this was rehearsed. Clayton adjusted his tie, looked the judge in the eye, and declared, I've seen Mr. Vaughn lose his temper, shouting at Marla, frightening Jody. He's controlling, demanding, hardly fit to manage a house. let alone an estate. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. My jaw ached from the pressure of clenching it shut. Every fiber wanted to shout back, but I swallowed it down. That was Marla's plan. Provoke me. Make me prove their lies true. Armand rose, calm as stone. "Mr. Rourke," he said, pacing slowly, "how often did you visit the Vaughn household?" Clayton hesitated. "A few times." "Enough to know." "Enough to know," Armand repeated, his tone slicing. "And yet, you claim intimate knowledge of private matters." "Interesting." He flipped a page. "Did you ever live under Mr. Vaughn's roof?" "No," Clayton muttered. Armand turned to the judge. "Your Honor, this man was never present in the home for more than passing visits. His testimony is hearsay, influenced. At best, at worst, it's a deliberate fabrication." A hush fell. My chest swelled with a mix of rage and pride. Logic, clean, undeniable, was peeling away Marla's lies. Still, my silence burned like acid. Before the weight of Armand's cross-examination settled, a voice rose from the audience. "I have something to say." Heads turned as Selma Drayton, a long-standing member of our church, stepped forward. Her face, stern but steady, carried the gravitas of a woman who'd seen too much to keep quiet. "Your Honor," Selma said, her voice strong, "I have witnessed Marla with this man, Mr. Rourke, long before her husband passed. I saw them meeting privately, holding hands, in the cafe on Main Street. I chose silence then out of pity, but I won't sit here and watch a good man be destroyed by lies." Gasps swept through the benches. Marla's composure cracked, her face drained of color. Clayton looked down, avoiding every gaze. For the first time, the smug mask slipped, and Marla's eyes darted, searching for escape. Vindication surged through me, not triumphant, but heavy, like a storm cloud breaking. The judge's gavel struck, sharp as thunder. "Order! This court will recess until further review." The room erupted in chatter. As people rose, Marla turned toward me, her voice barely above a whisper but venomous enough to pierce. "This isn't over." I met her stare, unflinching. The years had taught me patience. The storms had taught me endurance. Her words slid off me like rain against stone. Outside, sunlight broke weakly through the clouds, but the battle was far from done. Walking out of the courthouse, the air felt heavy. Though the storm had cleared, the sky had softened into a pale blue, but the weight of eyes on me was sharper than any rain. Some townsfolk nodded as if to offer support, their expressions somber, even kind. Others turned away or whispered, their doubt written across their faces. Every step down those courthouse steps reminded me of how quickly a reputation could be split in two. Armand walked beside me, carrying his briefcase with the calm of a man who had seen too many battles. He leaned toward me and said quietly, "Don't think this is over. Marla isn't the type to retreat without sharpening her claws again." His warning lingered as the crowd's murmurs buzzed in my ears like a swarm that wouldn't die down. At the corner diner near the courthouse square, the sound of voices carried through an open window. I paused, catching pieces of a heated argument between neighbors. One voice defended me. "Lester's always been a decent man, gave his life for that family." Another retorted, "Marla wouldn't risk her reputation unless she was telling the truth." My stomach twisted. It was one thing to face lies in a courtroom, another to hear them spilling into the streets, splitting the people I'd known for decades. A diner I once stepped into for comfort now felt like hostile ground. I tightened my grip on my cane and walked on, sadness pressing down harder than anger. Jody caught up with me as I moved toward the edge of the square. Her footsteps were uncertain, her voice even more so. "Grandpa," she said, almost in a whisper, "I don't know what to believe anymore." Her eyes, though, betrayed something. Doubt, fear, maybe even guilt. I slowed and looked at her, seeing the confusion of a girl caught between blood and truth. "Truth has a way of surfacing, child," I told her gently. "It can be buried, but it doesn't stay down forever." She bit her lip, nodded faintly, then drifted back toward her mother's shadow. Watching her walk away left an ache deeper than any insult Marla could hurl. Back at the house, the tension erupted. Jody's voice carried down the hallway, sharper than usual but still trembling. "Why did you lie in court, Mom?" The sound of Marla's hand slamming the table echoed through the walls. "How dare you question me?" she shouted. Her anger was wild, a cornered animal lashing at the closest target. Clayton hovered nearby, trying to soothe her, but his presence only seemed to stoke the flames. Jody's voice cracked with something between fear and defiance, but Marla's rage drowned it out. The walls that held them together were showing fractures, and those cracks were deepening by the minute. That evening, I sat in my chair, the house quiet except for the ticking clock and the faint drip of rainwater from the eaves. Weariness pressed against my bones, but sleep was far from me. Then the phone rang. I lifted the receiver, and on the other end was a trembling voice I didn't recognize. "Mr. Vaughn," it whispered. "I know something about Marla. Meet me tomorrow." The line went dead before I could ask a single question. I sat there, staring at the silent receiver, a chill spreading through me. Someone out there had seen behind her mask. Tomorrow might bring either salvation or deeper peril. The house sat quiet that evening, the only sound the soft hum of the refrigerator and the wind brushing against the windows. The silence after the call was heavy, pressing down like a weight. Whoever had spoken knew too much about Marla, and that alone was enough to make the skin prickle. Armand sat across from me, hands folded, his eyes sharp behind his glasses. "You shouldn't go alone," he said. His voice was firm, cautious. "If this person truly has something, then it could tip the scales. But if it's a setup, we need to be ready." A part of me wanted to dismiss the call as a cruel prank, but something in the man's trembling voice, the urgency in his tone, had sounded too real. The storm of doubt inside my chest left little room for sleep. Instead, I stared at the clock, watching the hands crawl forward toward the appointed hour. The next night, we drove together, headlights cutting across damp roads still glistening from yesterday's storm. The old train station loomed in the distance, abandoned for years, its windows broken and tracks rusted. Shadows pooled under the overhang where the benches once sat. A figure stepped forward from the darkness, coat collar pulled high. His voice was low, hurried. "You don't know me, Mr. Vaughn, but I know Marla. She's not who she pretends to be." From his pocket, he pulled a small flash drive, pressing it into my palm. "This has the proof, emails, plans. She and that man, Clayton, they're plotting to sell everything out from under you. Take it, and don't tell anyone you saw me." Before I could ask a single question, he turned, disappearing back into the shadows as quickly as he had come. Only the sound of his footsteps echoed, then silence. I looked at Armand. His jaw was tight. "We finally have something solid." Back at my kitchen table, the glow of Armand's laptop lit the room. One by one, files opened, emails, spreadsheets, contracts half-written, each word burned. There it was in black and white, Marla and Clayton trading messages about liquidating the property, laughing over how easily the old man could be pushed aside. My throat tightened. My son's home, the place he had sworn would always remain mine, reduced to a bargaining chip in their scheme. For all her false tears, Marla's heart had been elsewhere all along. The rage was hot, but beneath it ran a colder stream, resolve. They might have thought I was finished, but the evidence was now in my hands. Armand looked at me with a steady gaze. "This changes everything." The following morning, the world twisted again. Sitting on the porch, I unfolded the local paper, and my eyes froze on the headline, "Elderly man unfit to manage family estate." The words leapt off the page like venom. The article painted me as senile, dangerous even, a man clinging to power at the expense of his grieving daughter-in-law. Every line dripped with Marla's hand. Neighbors would read this, friends at church, people I'd known for decades. The thought of them whispering behind their hands, questioning my sanity, made my chest ache. Marla hadn't just struck at me, she'd struck at my name, my history, my dignity. The paper trembled in my hands, but I forced myself to keep reading. She was desperate now, and desperate people revealed their truest selves. Folding the paper shut, I set it on the table. The anger had burned itself down into something sharper. I looked at Armand, who had been silently waiting for my reaction. "If she wants war," I said, my voice steady, "she'll have it. Tomorrow. We bring this to court." From the doorway, I felt eyes on me. Jody stood there, her young face pale, her hands gripping the frame. She didn't speak, but her gaze flickered between me and the newspaper, full of confusion, fear, and something else. Doubt. The line had been drawn, and there was no turning back. The walk up the courthouse steps felt like a gauntlet. Every pair of eyes bore down on me. Neighbors, reporters, townsfolk who had once shared coffee and handshakes now whispering, measuring me. My cane tapped against the stone, steadying my legs as much as my nerves. Inside, the air was thicker still, the silence sharpened by the scrape of chairs and rustle of papers. Marla swept in not long after, draped in black. Her chin held high. Clayton trailed beside her, polished shoes clicking with arrogant rhythm. They looked like a team. I looked like a relic. We were seated opposite one another. The judge entered, his gavel striking once to command attention. My chest tightened, but Armand leaned close, whispering, "Steady yourself, Lester. Today is not about appearances. It's about truth." His words settled me, like a hand pressed firm against my shoulder. The opening arguments began. Marla's lawyer rose first, a young man with slicked-back hair and the voice of someone who thought charm could outweigh evidence. He painted me as a confused old man, too frail and too lost in the past to handle an estate. "Mr. Vaughn," he said, glancing at me with a sympathetic smile that curdled into pity, "isn't fit to make sound judgments anymore. For the good of the family, responsibility should rest with Mrs. Kincaid." Gasps and murmurs echoed, as if his words confirmed suspicions already planted. Then it was Armand's turn. He stood tall, his tone steady but firm. "Lester Vaughn has lived in this town for 78 years. He has raised a family here, worked honest labor, supported his church, and cared for his community. His record speaks louder than any accusation. This case is not about senility, it is about greed, and whether deception can erase a man's lifetime of integrity." The words stirred something in me. For the first time in months, I felt my pride stand taller than my grief. The turning point came when Armand slid a small black flash drive across the polished wood. He asked permission, then connected it to the courtroom projector. In an instant, emails flickered onto the screen, messages between Marla and Clayton, discussing in cold, transactional detail how they would sell the house and split the money. Words like "liquidate quickly" and "get him out first" shone bright against the wall. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I heard someone whisper, "My God, she planned this all along." Marla's face cracked under the weight of the exposure. She barked objections, her voice climbing to a pitch that betrayed panic. Clayton shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting toward the floor. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe in vindication, the truth standing naked for all to see. Then, a voice I hadn't expected rose from behind. "Your Honor, may I say something?" It was Jody. She stood trembling, her small hands clenched at her sides. The judge raised an eyebrow but nodded. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "I overheard Mom and Mr. Rourke talking weeks ago. They said once Grandpa was gone, they'd sell the house. I didn't know what to do, but I can't sit here and pretend anymore." The courtroom fell silent. Every creak of the benches, every breath held, magnified her words. Marla's head snapped toward her daughter, eyes blazing. "Jody, sit down," she hissed. But the girl didn't move. Her courage stood taller than her fear, and I felt tears prick my eyes, not for the betrayal, but for the glimmer of truth from my own bloodline. The judge finally raised a hand, calling for order. "This court will recess before further testimony." His gavel struck once more, and the tension splintered into a storm of whispers. As the bailiff moved to clear the room, Marla leaned across the table, her face twisted with venom. "This isn't over, old man," she whispered, each word dripping with hate. My hands gripped the edge of the table until the wood pressed deep into my palms. I didn't flinch, didn't answer her threats. Instead, I whispered under my breath, steady as a prayer, "This isn't just about a house. It's about my name." The gavel's echo still hung in the air as the recess began, but I knew everything was about to be decided, one way or another. The courtroom was so quiet that even the creak of the judge's chair echoed against the paneled walls. Every breath felt heavier than the storm clouds that had passed the night before. Hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, heart thudding in a rhythm too slow to match the pounding anticipation. Across the aisle, Marla sat rigid, face pale but lips curled in defiance. Clayton slouched beside her, his eyes already darting toward the door. Jody kept her gaze low, her fingers twisting nervously. Armand leaned close, whispering steady words meant to anchor me, no matter how this ends. The truth is on record. The judge adjusted his glasses and began. His voice was deliberate, calm, yet every syllable struck like a hammer. This court has reviewed the testimony, the documents, and the evidence presented. Silence deepened. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Each word pulled me back through the years, sacrifices made, promises kept. The very foundation of my life now balanced on this moment. The judge's pause stretched, long enough for doubt to slither in. Then, clear and final, the will is valid. Ownership of the property remains with Lester Vaughn. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd. Some gasped. Others nodded as though justice had always been obvious. Marla lurched to her feet, her voice cracking into a shriek. "This is a lie! He doesn't deserve that house!" But the sight of her unraveling needed no restraint. It was the sound of truth finally catching up. As the judge moved to adjourn, whispers filled every corner. I caught Clayton sliding toward the exit, his hand brushing Marla's shoulder once, then recoiling as if her disgrace might stain him too. She reached for him, desperate, but he kept walking. The neighbors who once whispered doubts now leaned together, murmuring disapproval. "She fooled us all," one voice hissed. "Poor Lester." Another answered. The isolation she had forced upon me had boomeranged, leaving her the one abandoned. Her eyes darted wildly, searching for an ally and finding none. Then, in the midst of her collapse, Jody rose from the gallery. She stepped forward hesitantly, her face pale but determined. The judge had already declared, but she wanted her words heard. "Grandpa," she said softly, trembling, "I know I didn't stand up soon enough, but I don't want to follow lies anymore." Tears burned behind tired eyes. She turned to Marla, her voice breaking. "Mom, I can't go with you." A hush swept through the room. Jody crossed the floor, stopping at my side, clutching my hand with both of hers. The warmth of her grip undid something in me I thought was gone forever. Hours later, as the sun bled gold over Asheville's hills, we sat on the porch together. The house behind us no longer felt like contested territory. It was home again, not just brick and wood, but memory and promise. Jody leaned against me, silent, watching the light fade. Armand had left after one last firm handshake. His work done, the community would go on talking, but the verdict was clear, and so was the future, for the first time in years. Peace pressed into the lines of my face instead of sorrow. Looking out at the horizon, the words formed as much for those who'd listen as for myself. This house isn't just mine. It's a story, a reminder of sacrifice, of dignity, of what family should mean. Protect your name. Protect your dignity. Don't let greed erase your legacy. Jody squeezed my hand tighter, and for the first time since my son's passing, hope stirred like a living thing. The battle was over. What remained was the lesson and the legacy.